Hello and welcome to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Robles, joined as always by my friend, David Sparks. How's it going, David?
Hello, Mr. Robles. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. I'm super excited. It's the first time I'm podcasting with our special guest today, maker of Overcast, the incredible new transcription service, and we're going to talk about 3D printing a little bit as well. Marco Arment, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, nice to be here again. And Stephen, welcome, I guess. I don't know. I've been on the show before, but not with you, and I've loved it ever since you've taken it over, so good job so far.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, and you've been posting about 3D printing as well, and so I think for Mac Power, for more power users, we're going to talk about 3D printing, and because my middle son, he just has 3D printed stuff all over, and so I'm curious your experience.
Absolutely.
And Stephen Robles, you don't even know what kind of Pandora's box you open when you talk to me about 3D printing, so I had no idea.
You were
You're one of us too?
I want to change my middle name to Gridfinity. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't even gotten into that yet.
Oh, no. We have a lot to talk about, Marco.
We sure do.
All right, very good. Oh, and one quick announcement. Our second monthly bonus episode is out. We mentioned it last week, but you can hear all about David smart home escapades and more tips there. And so you can look for the Pro Max users feed. That link will be below. And we're actually going to do a follow-up from ATP and our last episode about backups, because we talked about Backblaze last week, and Accidental Tech Podcast talked about it a few weeks ago, about how iCloud Drive files and folders are no longer backed up to Backblaze specifically. And we had a wonderful email from Brian of Fat Cat Software talk about it. And we just wanted to be explicitly clear. And a listener of Mac Power Users actually got an email from Backblaze when they asked. But to confirm, iCloud Drive files and folders are no longer backed up from Backblaze, even if you have download locally and it's all syncing. And hopefully, Marco, can you guys confirm that? Because you guys went really deep on it on ATP.
Honestly, I have lost track of what the answer is, so I can't confirm or deny.
Well, it seemed like the support email, one of our listeners specifically asked, and we'll put a link. I linked it last week, and I will link it again. But even if the file and folder is downloaded locally, as long as it's designated as an iCloud Drive folder, this is from Backblaze's support. This is from Janet at Backblaze. It says that it just cannot include iCloud Drive folders, anything that macOS controls via Cloud Sync. So if you have files and folders outside of iCloud Drive, outside of your desktop and documents, if you're syncing those will get backed up. And it can still do photo backup, which is what the email from Brian was stating. But he also has an app which is for backing up photos and other photo features, which we'll link down in the video description. But we just wanted to be clear. And if anyone else has heard from Backblaze, we'd love to know.
Yeah. And Brian's from Power Photos. He was a guest on the show a year or two ago. Really good guy. And right on top of this stuff, of course, he's very interested in photo backup with his application. It sounds to me like it's almost on Apple, just the way they're treating this API now. But we all need to be aware, because I know a lot of people are relying on offsite backup and they need a good one that works. Stephen and I have a new backup show in the that we are starting to prep. So we're going to go into this deeper when the time comes, but everybody be aware.
And Marco, what's your current system? Are you still using Backblaze? And do you sync desktop and documents to iCloud?
I have tried syncing desktop and documents to iCloud. It basically never does what I want. And it introduces so much complexity in ways such as the file path changing of where that actually is on your system, which is part of the complexity that we see here, that it introduces so much complexity that I don't want that. Also, so I operate with two Macs. I've been doing this for a while, which I'm sure we'll get into. I have a main desktop and a laptop. They both happen to be physically laptops, but that's for a different time. But I actually don't want them to be perfectly the same. If I wanted them to be perfectly the same, I would just take the laptop with me everywhere, the same one. I actually like having two different Macs set up in different ways with different work being done on them and different, the portable one, it has less software. It's a more focused device. It's more things that I would only really need while out and about or while traveling. So I actually don't want that level of sync, not only because I find it unreliable and complex, but also because I actually don't want those things to match up perfectly. But that being said, to answer your question, yes, Backblaze.
That's so curious. I want to ask about that too, because I'm the opposite. I want exactly every file and every app available everywhere I am. So if I edit a thumbnail on my Mac Studio, I can go to the patio and open the same file. It's in iCloud Drive, has the same changes, and I can just keep working on it. And so I want to get more on your setup in a second. I also want to say, David, you'll be happy to hear, I am backed up officially now, even on my iCloud Drive. I used Parachute Backup, which you guys mentioned on ATP, we mentioned here on the show. It is backing up both my entire iCloud Drive and my iCloud Photos. It's actually a dual system. You decide where you want each to be saved, and they are both running weekly, and they go to my network attached storage, my Synology, and I just checked it. All the backups have been successful, so David, I'm officially backed up.
Bless you. Bless you, Stephen.
Thank you. And it worked. And one Parachute is a one-time purchase, just in case anyone wondering. We talked about it a few weeks ago, but it does the thing. You know, you have to have a NAS or some other hard drive that you back up to, but it works. It works.
Yeah. I use Carbon Copy Cloner for that. I used to use Super Duper, but for some reason I switched to Carbon Copy Cloner at some point. Marco, do you use an app like that? Do you do like the mirror drive?
I have done that. I don't currently. Currently, I just use Time Machine for that role. But I have used both Carbon Copy Cloner and Super Duper at various times over the years. They're both great apps. They kind of like trade back and forth who's on top at any given moment, I think, with features and OS updates and things. But I've had great luck with both of them in the past.
Well, we got off on that tangent, but I'd like to get back to Marco for a minute. So, Marco, now you've been, for folks who don't know you, you are the developer of Overcast. Now, was it coming up on 12 years, right?
Something like that. It's a long time. Yeah, 12 years this year.
Seems like just yesterday you were announcing it, and that's pretty cool. And you are now also an entrepreneur.
Well, I mean, I would argue I was the whole time, but
in multiple ways. You
I
added
guess. How about you are now a restaurateur? How's that the word?
That feels like a lot. So my wife and I now own a restaurant, I would say.
Yeah.
I think restaurateur suggests a level of engagement with the rest of the industry, maybe, or multiple restaurants that we don't really have.
Haven't got your Michelin star yet?
Yeah, you know what? I think we just missed it. But we'll see. We'll see for the future. You never know.
There's actually a great show on Apple TV about Michelin stars, like the Road to Michelin stars. It's pretty wild. So, highly recommend. I have a couple questions about your restaurant, though.
Absolutely.
Tech-wise, and so I actually have a family friend who owns a restaurant. They're just on this journey now, and the whole online ordering and DoorDash and Uber is very complicated. They've decided not to do that. And so I was curious. It looks like your restaurant does online orders, but you haven't opened up to like third-party apps like DoorDash and Uber. Have you explored that? Is that too much added complication? Why or why not?
Well, we actually have a huge amount of complexity running our particular restaurant that reduces the amount of complexity in this area. Oh. So the complexity of our restaurant is that what we did was when our favorite restaurant went for sale, because the owners wanted to retire, we decided to buy it to preserve it, really, and to make sure that nobody else could buy it and ruin it, because we cared about it so much. And it's a really big part of our community on Fire Island. Now, because it's on Fire Island, you can't drive there. All summer long, there's no consumer vehicles are allowed, only emergency vehicles, really. And so there is no DoorDash and there is no Uber Eats. There's no delivery services whatsoever, unless it's a kid on a bike with one of those big baskets on the back. So we actually don't need to deal with that at all. We need to deal with a lot of other things, like how do you get all the ingredients there? And the answer is on boats, really. So there's other complexities we deal with, but we don't do anything with those services because they don't operate there. We do have, so the online ordering system that we have is really just a feature of our point of sale system, which is Toast, which is a pretty popular one that a lot of restaurants use. Toast just has a thing where you can put a link on your website that links directly into your ticketing system, and people can basically submit orders directly, and it pops up, and somebody it prints out and it beeps, and people go start making it. And so it's kind of the older school way of doing it, but that's how we're doing it.
When you bought the restaurant, I was thinking, because I had a prior life where I used to represent companies that owned restaurants, and that was the worst business. Those people work so hard. I mean, and they have the most failures in restaurants. It's like, oh my gosh, what's he get himself into? How are you feeling now that you've been in it a year or two?
We are very fortunate that we bought a successful restaurant, so all we had to do was keep it going.
Yeah, not mess it up. Yeah.
Exactly. We would never. look, owning a restaurant was never on my life to-do list.
Yeah.
It surprised both of us that we were doing it. And when we were going through the process of, first evaluating whether we should buy it and then going to like the bank and the accountant and the lawyer and figuring all that stuff out, everybody kept asking, so do you have a lot of experience in the restaurant business? And we're like, well, I worked as a busser when I was 16, and that's about it. And they're like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. My advice would have been, please don't. You're going to
that was their advice as well. Everyone said, don't do this. And if it wasn't our favorite restaurant, and if we weren't, in our minds saving it, and if it wasn't already successful, and critically, if we didn't have all of the existing people on board who were going to stay and manage it, we would never have done it, and we would never buy a different restaurant. It was a very special case for this one, and it helps tremendously that the people stayed and that they are doing most of the management. And my wife, Tiff, does, for whatever part falls on us, she does the vast majority of that. So very little of it falls on me, except basically technology issues and handshakes and occasionally filing some permits.
I'm thinking like that restaurant now has killer Wi-Fi. That's what I'm thinking.
Not only does it have killer Wi-Fi, and of course backup internet service, so we don't go offline, but also the other restaurants are now asking me for Wi-Fi advice for their restaurants. So I might
heard your story about your...
become like the de facto IT person for the restaurant business there, which maybe I shouldn't, but that kind of happens.
I've heard you talk about the whole extended ubiquity setup in your restaurant on ATP, which is awesome. Do you have iPads and stuff in the restaurant that are like business devices? And if so, are you using like Apple Mobile Device Management, Jamf? How are you managing that kind of stuff?
That's a great question. So the point of sale systems, they're all like Toasts terminals. They're all custom Android tablets with like the cache drawers and stuff like that. So those aren't ours. We do, however, use an iMac in the office for like general kind of office things. And we have an iPad mini as the music player that feeds the mixer and everything else. And those are the only Apple devices. Oh, sorry. And we also use Apple TVs to run the two TVs plus a security monitor in the back. So we have 3 Apple TVs. We actually manage them all as like home devices in a way. Like we have like a couple of locks, like keypad locks on a couple of doors for stock and stuff. And those are just, we have an Apple Home called Restaurant. And we have, we have like users of the home, guests of the home are our staff. And when somebody unlocks the stockroom door, I get a notification on my phone saying, Julie, unlock the stockroom, stuff like that.
Awesome.
It's all through Apple Home stuff and HomeKit locks, and we have,
What locks? What lock models can you say?
I think it's the Schlager. It's theirs that has like
Encode Plus.
That's it. Yeah, one of those, or whichever one has the home key support. Although, as it turns out, home key is so slow that we just type in our codes. No one uses it.
You should get the ultra wideband ones from Acara now. People just approach.
Honestly, I have had a couple of Acara things in the past, and I wasn't too impressed. In general, I have had pretty poor luck with most HomeKit-made devices. I had awful experiences with the Logitech secure home video cameras. I had, the Acara lock. I had one on my house, and I had to replace it with the Schlager one because it was so unreliable and finicky. I've had a couple of the Eve like Air monitors and stuff, and I found those to be pretty finicky. So most of the home stuff I've had, I've actually just left on separate platforms. Like my favorite light switches are all Lutron Caseta. It has its own entire system.
Lutron's the best.
Yeah, like it connects to HomeKit, so I can use HomeKit if I want to control it, but in practice I never do because it's running on its own system, and I just use its own stuff. Or I use physical
you
switches.
also said you've got a camera monitor at the restaurant, and that's probably using one of the HomeKit camera setups.
Not even close. Nope, all Ubiquity.
Ubiquity.
Okay,
I was going to say.
Gotcha.
And you're not using like Homebridge to get that into HomeKit or whatever.
Again, I have found that like whenever I put more stuff into HomeKit, I mostly don't use those integrations, or they end up breaking eventually, and then I just never reset them up again. Light switches again, they're all with Lutron. I have like all of my temperature sensors and everything. That's all Yolink now, which is great. Super inexpensive, and it has its own radio protocol that's very, it's super long range, low power, goes through walls and critically metal refrigerator boxes. So
are those
everything
Zigbee?
is Yolink.
Is that what they use?
No, it's LoRa. It's a different system, LORA, and it's made to be. I think there's only a couple of brands that make stuff that uses it, and I don't even know if they're interchange or if they interoperate. But it's very inexpensive little sensors that just have very long battery. Like I have these temperature sensors all over the restaurant and all over my house that run on a couple of AA batteries that last years on those batteries.
Yeah,
it's great.
Okay, last restaurant question, because we got to get to Overcast and transcripts. The Apple TVs, I've had to set up like digital signage in venues, and it's always a challenge, like what software to use, what are you playing? Are you just looping videos? What are you putting on the Apple TVs in the restaurant?
We don't really have a great solution. That's kind of up in the air. The challenge is there are very few video streaming services that are licensed for business use. We have, because you can't just put on YouTube and call it a day. You have to have a business
restaurants
license.
do that.
Well, they do, but they shouldn't. Right. So there's, we're bouncing between whatever crappy app we can find that season that supports it. And it's never like right. I don't even know what it is right now. We just changed it like last month, and I forgot. But the music service is much simpler. There's a whole bunch of those. We had Sound Machine for that last year. This year we're doing Pandora's thing. That's their Pandora's commercial thing. But for video services, it's an awful landscape out there.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity on Apple TV for an app developer to come up with like remember when Panic made that great status board app years ago?
Yeah.
And like stuff like that for businesses and public places as well, to really turn the Apple TV into a marketing platform. It's just kind of surprising to me that nobody's ever really jumped on that.
Yeah, it's an incredibly capable platform that, unfortunately, when Apple launched the tvOS platform in the App Store, they made a couple of implementation decisions to make things simpler for users in theory that ended up making it pretty difficult and cumbersome for developers to develop for it. One of the biggest problems is persistent storage can't really be counted on Apple TV. And so it makes it very unpleasant to develop apps for it. Then, by basically never lowering the pricing or introducing cheaper models that were meaningfully cheaper, I think Apple severely limited their market power as well. And then for games, that's a whole separate story of like requiring the remote to be compatible, not having an official controller that shipped with every Apple TV, and so that pretty much killed the game market. So in addition to the storage problems I was mentioning earlier, so it's a tough platform. It basically only makes sense for the major video apps to develop for it.
All right, last quick ones. You just walked around Manhattan, 32 miles.
That's right.
Amazing accomplishment.
The Great Saunter. Yep.
The Great Saunter. You wore 2 fitness trackers. You had an Apple Watch Ultra, which model? 2 or 3?
3.
3. Apple Watch Ultra 3, and another one. And you said accuracy was actually pretty good between the two of them?
Yeah. So, the other one I wore was the Suunto Race S, which is it's one of their smaller models. Most like sport, like extreme sport watches are very large. And they don't really, they're a little too large for me, especially like most of this training was happening in cooler weather, like, in the winter and spring. And trying to fit a big, chunky watch under a jacket sleeve is really awkward. So I wanted something smaller, so I went to the Suunto Race S. Great platform, great watch, super lightweight. Basically, the summary of my findings on that whole world, I first tried Garmin, then landed on the Suunto, is basically that they are terrible smartwatches, but very good sport watches. And so if what you want is more like extreme sport abilities, or very long battery life, very long endurance, extreme condition abilities to operate, they can be better than the Apple Watch. And in certain ways, even more common stuff is actually better on them in certain ways, certain workout preferences and things. But if you want like smart functionality, notifications, responses to notifications, Siri access, things like that, they either can't do those things or they do them very poorly compared to an Apple Watch. So like as computers, the Apple Watch is much better. But as like sport trackers, some of these can be very good. And I found the accuracy, to answer your question in a very roundabout way, the accuracy I found for like GPS tracking and stuff is good enough between the Suunto and the Ultra. They ended up deviating by the end of the 32 miles. They ended up deviating by about 8 or 10%, something like that. So not nothing, but not enough to really be a problem.
I feel like all that fitness tracking stuff, you just have to treat as a relative marker when you get it and don't expect any of it to be actually correct.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I've been going to, I went to the doctor and I got a body scan, what's percentage of you is muscle and fat and all that.
Oh, the
And I
DEXA scan?
What?
The DEXA scan?
I forget. I think mine was called InBody or something, but it gave me a printout and the doctor said, oh, you're doing good on this. You need to do better on that. And I thought, that's actually good data to have. And I bought off Amazon a home version of that where you pull up a handle and you hold the handle while you weigh yourself and it runs an electric current through you. That's the technology is kind of amazing. They used to put you in like a tank of water to figure this stuff out.
It sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. But now it's very simple, but it's shocking to me because the same day I went to the doctor and did the home one, there's like a 5% difference, in like significant results. And I'm sure the doctor one is the accurate one. But, I was telling Daisy, my wife, I'm like, but now we have a measuring point. It's like, it's not necessarily accurate, but if that number goes down or this number goes up, that you're making progress. And don't worry about, the actual number.
Yeah, that's what I've found to be the case with almost all consumer wearable or fitness kind of tech is that it's almost always fairly consistent relative to itself.
Yeah.
So if you do a run one day and it says you burned 400 calories and you do another run the next day and it says you burned 500 calories, those probably are not accurate numbers in absolute terms, but in relative terms they can be useful. You can say, oh, I went about 20% harder or 25% harder today than yesterday. And same thing with any kind of, calorie measurement, body measurement, fat evaluation, all those different things those do, they are good relative to their own past measurements. But not in terms of absolutes, like things like calorie measurement. They're always just estimates.
It lets you know if you're doing better or worse, and that's probably good enough. And honestly, I don't think any of them are accurate enough to treat as gospel, so don't,
Yeah, that's what doctors are for.
Exactly. Marco, it's been a while since you've been on the show. You have the latest and greatest, right? You probably got the latest and greatest Mac, right?
I think I actually might have. So I'm using the M3 Max MacBook Pro 16 as my desktop. Is that what I was using last time? I think it might be.
It may have been. Maybe it was slightly before that. I don't know. But yeah, that's cool. So you're using the M3. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going so far great. Like every time a new, M Max series chip comes out, I'm like, oh, should I upgrade? And look at the numbers. I'm like, I can get a little faster, but so far I'm fine with it. And I spec them up a lot. Like I get the 8 terabyte. I think this is 128 gigs of RAM. I'll double check that. Yes, it is. So it ends up being a pretty expensive purchase. So if I'm only going to get like 20% more CPU performance, I'm not going to spend $7,000 to do that, or whatever it is. Like, that's a lot. So I'm going to wait a few years, a few generations. So my current plan is, this so far the M3 Max is working out totally great for me. I don't think I'm ever meaningfully bottlenecked by it. Usually my thought is much slower than what the computer can keep up with.
But be honest, if you could have gotten an M5 Max MacBook Pro without Tahoe, would you have done it?
That's a little tempting. Okay, I'm going to say no, only because there are certain things in Tahoe I've gotten used to. So I did, a few months back, I did switch my browser from Safari to Chrome. And when you're on Tahoe, Chrome will do the autofill SMS verification message thing.
Right.
And because they made an API for that in Tahoe. That alone is so convenient that I might stick on it just for that.
So do you have Tahoe on your M3 Max MacBook Pro now?
Yeah, I ended up upgrading both. So I've gotten a little bit, first of all, like I'm developing software and there are certain things that are easier. So for instance, we'll get to Overcast, I'm sure, in a second. Yeah. Overcast Transcription, the transcription app that runs on the transcription servers requires Tahoe because it uses an API that's only on Tahoe. So when I was developing that app, all last summer and fall, I was developing it mostly on my little laptop and then having shipping it between laptop and desktop to keep running things, and then eventually shipping it to the servers, and it was a big pain in the butt. So now having everything on Tahoe, despite me not liking Tahoe, interface wise, I think it's a mess, but it is more convenient for me to use it. So I tolerate the parts I don't like in order to get the productivity benefits from it.
Now, I know you're using the actual Apple APIs for the transcriptions and the Overcast transcripts, but are you using AI anywhere in your workflow, like Claude Cowork or Codex, aside from all that transcription work?
And first of all, I would even say like it's questionable whether transcription using Apple's framework counts as AI, because like a few years ago we called the same thing machine learning.
Sure.
But anyway,
Apple actually gave up that fight. They really worked hard to not say AI for a long time. Everything was machine learning, and then they were like, "Forget it. We got to do it."
Yeah,
But
exactly.
do they say artificial intelligence or do they say Apple intelligence?
Well, that's a whole thing.
They say AI, and then you can leave it to your own interpretation.
Right. But so where I use AI in my work so far is, first of all, it has largely replaced or at least precluded a lot of Google searches for me. A lot of web searches where I'm looking for a piece of information. I usually will go to my AI of choice first for that, because usually it will find it for me faster. And then if I need to verify it, they are now much better at providing links to verify. So for me, I use AI a lot every day for basically what used to be web searches. And then I used it earlier. So I'm not using it to write huge amounts of code. I am using it, though, to help me write the code that I'm already choosing to write. So for instance, earlier today, I was working on a fix to the way Overcast tries to match up transcripts after dynamic ad insertion has happened and messed up the alignment with your copy of the transcript, which the current shipping version in the App Store doesn't always get it right. And I've been trying to line this up. I've been trying to work on that algorithm for months. And I was just hitting walls. And the other day, I had Claude Code take a look at it. I said, hey, go to this, in this file, look at this function. What do you see? And it found a couple of little edge case bugs that I haven't found for months. And earlier I was doing a different part of that, and I said something like, write me a function that tries to find this chunk within this array by the center and then expand outward and find the best match and like I just described that in a paragraph, and it wrote the function for me. And it's a 50-line function. It's not a lot of code, but it wrote it and it was right. And for me to write that function would have taken half a day, because I would have gotten a lot more wrong along the way. I would have had to go back and fix. And then I said, generate tests so you can verify this answer. And it generated a handful of tests, and it made a couple of tweaks. And then I said, generate a lot more tests. And it did. It ended up making like 45 different test conditions to try to different like insertion and deletion patterns and different overlaps and things like that. I never would have done that part. So it took the part that I could have done and would have done and made it take a lot less time and made it have fewer bugs. And then it took the part I would never have done and did it for me with no effort and no complaining. And I just kept saying more, and I didn't have to feel bad about that. Am I making somebody do this for me? Like, I'm so demanding. It's never enough. Avoid all that. I didn't have to do it, so that's great. And then it helped me find a super obscure bug in the code I did write. And so overall, I'm finding a lot of uses for it like that. Now, I am also working on a second complete app, tentatively called Reminder, that I can't imagine Apple will ever let me ship that with that name. But I will try. but I'm making an app that basically is like better snoozes and management of your reminders data. And I've been using it myself to manage my own stuff. And that app, I completely vibe coded the first version of, so I could start using it myself. And then once I kind of got it to a place where I realized like this is something that I like. I've gotten it where I need it to be, but now I actually want to make it good, so I can tolerate it more and maybe someday ship it as a product. When I got to that point, I took over. And again, I'm still using AI sometimes for things like, hey, can you write me a quick function to do this? But I found that for me to make an app to my quality standards, things like, I would ask the AI before I took it over, I would say like, hey, this animation is messed up when you move this thing to this thing. And it would just be totally unable to fix that, no matter what I did. So certain things like that, I found it is better to do it myself. But I think, if you ask me that same question in 6 months, it might be a different answer. It's moving so quickly, and AI coding is so good. Most of the time, I'm not limited by its abilities, but rather I'm limited by me not thinking to ask it to do something, because I don't even consider the possibility, or I would assume it wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, this is a thing I've been talking about a lot lately, is I think we all have mindsets about work and how we work with computers, and AI turns it on its head. The analogy I use is motion pictures. Like in the old days, you'd go to a play, you watch a play. When the first film cameras came out, they'd put the camera in the audience to watch the stage, and it took them time to understand you could put the camera on the stage. And we have the same problems with the way we work with computers as this thing becomes more of a tool.
Absolutely. I mean, earlier on in a lot of my development career, and a little occasionally today, but usually not today, but I used to have a problem where I would not even consider attempting a certain feature or algorithm in my code because I would just assume the hardware won't be able to do that fast enough.
Yeah.
One thing about that was when I was back a million years ago when I was working on Instapaper, certain algorithms about like detecting where the page break should be for pagination to work right. My first few attempts at that, I had an idea of how to do it, but I'm like, there's no way the iPhone will be able to do that quickly enough. And eventually I tried it anyway, and it was fast enough. And then with Overcast, when I was prototyping that 12 years ago, 13 years ago actually was the prototype, when I was doing that, I thought about smart speed and voice boost processing on the audio, and I thought there's no way the iPhone's going to be fast enough to do that. And then I tried it, and sure enough, it did it with 5% CPU usage at the time, and of course now it's even lower. And so I was limited by me underestimating the performance of the hardware.
Yeah.
Well, now I feel like I'm limited by underestimating the capabilities of AI tools. And I think many of us will be for a while. That right now, oftentimes I will be doing a task that AI could do for me, but I didn't even think to ask it. And then other times I will finally have that insight and be like, I wonder. Recently, I was looking at a big table worth of numbers. It's like a huge budget list and everything, and I'm like, I paged into one of the AIs. I'm like, give me the story about this. What do you see? Look around for errors. And it was able to find correlations between different sections of the document. It was able to find it was like, oh well, this looks like this was reallocated over to this side over here to It found, not only did it do everything I asked it to do, but it found connections I never would have found on my own. And then when I went through and did a human review afterwards, the story it was telling, I found all the evidence to support it. It was correct. Similarly, I recently I took over some of my financial stuff that used to be managed, and now I'm doing it myself. And I had an account statement from a financial product that was complicated, and I just uploaded the PDF to one of the AIs, and I'm like, explain this to me. What does this term mean? What is the value of this over time? And it broke it all down. I didn't have to manually copy in text, or of course it read the PDF perfectly, even though it was a scan of a piece of paper, but it read it perfectly. Everything, it just, whatever I think to do with AI, when I think more ambitiously and I try it, so far it works almost every time, and I'm always blown away. Wow, I didn't think it would be able to do that, and it just did it.
However, this is where you're at the scary point, because I'm teaching a course on this right now. I'm seeing a lot of people go through it, and they first they're skeptical, then they become believers. But at that point, you have to be careful, because what it still doesn't do, and frankly shouldn't do, is judgment and taste, right? And I think a lot of people, as you start to have faith in it, start to give too much value to its judgment and taste, which is you. That's the human part of the equation. So I agree with you on everything you're saying, but I also think for folks listening, be careful as it starts getting more powerful that you don't let it take over the agency part that's most important.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out, first of all, a lot of judgment and taste it can do for you. But where I find AI is best in more creative or abstract endeavors is basically serving the role of brainstorming. Because when you think about what are the way these models work at a fundamental level, especially once you throw in randomness and uncertainty with things that are not easily answered, they're basically BS generators.
Yeah.
And what is brainstorming?
Yeah.
BS generation.
Yeah.
Basically, you're give me a bunch of ideas in this area, or where could this go? And AIs are really good at giving you an answer of what could be that answer. Here's something plausible. Here's something that follows these patterns with these restrictions and has these outputs and everything. So it's an amazing tool for brainstorming. Give me theoreticals, give me some ideas, and then you, the human, can pick up from there and direct things further. When I was trying to figure out a name for my reminder app that's not Reminder that Apple would actually use, or that Apple would actually permit, rather, I went straight to LLMs. Like, give me some help with ideas, and give me some name. And LLMs are horrific at coming up with product names.
Yes,
they are awful. I've used them a few times to start this process, and they're horrific. However, they did give me direction, and then I fed them like, give me some starting points here, and then it gave me, and then I was able to take the BS that it generated, and that might jog my memory to think of something better. Or that might kind of send me on a path, and then I was able to say, all right, how about this name, and this name? Do any of them have any obvious trademark conflicts that you can find? Any competing apps in the App Store for Mac or iOS? And any weird negative associations in different cultures I might not be aware of? And it's able to break all that down for me with far less work than me combing through the USPTO site looking for trademark conflicts. I can do that first, and it can rule out a bunch of stuff before I put in all that work. And send me down directions I never would have thought of.
I will say, on the brainstorming part, I do think the basis or the prompt for whatever brainstorming task you're giving it also has a lot to do with the output. Because if I just ask it, give me some video ideas about iPhone, that's going to be trash. But when I give it a transcript of a video I've already made, and I ask it for ideas about titles that might be click-worthy or curiosity-generating, it does a much better job at that. And I'll still tweak those and then come up with my own. But you do have to give it something, to try and do something out of whole cloth. I find it doesn't give as valuable information.
Absolutely, I found the same. That part of my process for trying to have it generate names, which again it's terrible at, was I wrote in a big Apple note first, like, here are some products I have named in the past. Here's why I named them these. Here's why I like these names. And here's how they have worked or not worked so well in the market. So based on that, here's what I'm working on now. Give me some name ideas. And that was dramatically better than it being undirected. However, it is still pretty bad.
Well, that's why I always laugh when people say, I'm going to pick this engine, this model or that model. It's 2% better or whatever. But they don't spend any time thinking about context. And it's all about the context. If you give it enough context to any of the big models now, you're going to get a good result. But it's way more about the context, in my opinion, than it is the actual model at this point.
Absolutely. The models now, when you are using them, when they are relying solely on their training data, or relying mostly on their training data, they have significantly worse output, like in terms of accuracy and things like that, than when you are giving them a whole bunch of context, or they're finding it themselves on the web, for instance, and they're then sifting through that. So the more you can give them, or the more you can direct them to go out and find, the better your results will be compared to just, based on your training data, give me some BS.
What do you think about the future of all of this? I feel like the local models are going to get really good soon for the most of the stuff we do. And just imagine where you don't have to pay Anthropic or OpenAI, but your Mac has local models strong enough to do a lot of the AI stuff we talk about. Do you think Apple's going to go there?
I think it's too early to really know that. Obviously, there's a huge financial incentive to try to shrink models down into more specialized, smaller versions that can run on smaller resources. Because as we are seeing right now, the entire industry is being constrained by the amount of massive data center capacity they can build to run massive chips in massive arrays, being powered by massive amounts of power. Meanwhile, we're all walking around with supercomputers in our pockets that are mostly sitting around doing nothing or waiting to show us ads. Yeah. So obviously, there's all this power that we can take advantage of in our pockets. This is part of why I built Overcast Transcription the way I did, where it just runs on a bunch of Mac Minis, and it's the base model Mac Minis, like the 16 gig M4 base model Mac Minis. It's 48 of those. And which now looks like a great investment, actually, in retrospect, but because now you can't get them anymore. But I intentionally wanted to build this feature only with what could run locally, especially also run on an iPhone. So while they are Mac Minis, they are using APIs that are also available on the iPhone. And one of Overcast's features is, if I don't have a transcript for your episode or your version of your episode and I can't figure out the alignment, you can just transcribe it locally on your phone. And it's not a super fast process, which is why I'm not just doing them all this way. An iPhone takes a good few minutes at least to transcribe most podcast episodes. And there are certainly limits on how much it'll let me execute in the background and stuff like that. So it's a little bit cumbersome to do it locally, but it can be done locally. So my plan with that is, over time, as the phones get faster, maybe I won't even need to run these servers anymore. Will I still be running them in 10 years? Probably not. I think the phones will be fast enough then that everybody could just, one person could do it locally and it'll just send it to everybody else, and we wouldn't necessarily need me to be running 48 10-year-old Mac Minis. Will I ever even upgrade those Mac Minis? I think probably not. I think I'll be using the ones I have and figuring out what I can eke out of them for a while.
So I'm glad you said this, because we're in an Overcast Transcripts now. And I just want to say, I'm going to link to the ATP episode where you go into this. I didn't want to melt my rug is the name of that episode, which was an amazing story. And so I won't rehash it here, but we'll link that in the show notes. And also the Reddit post in your Overcast subreddit, because you have a bunch of pictures here of the entire server rack, the 48 Mac Minis. It's incredible. And so, can you explain when an episode hits a feed? So when this Mac Power Users episode hits our RSS feed, what is happening in Overcast? Like, where is it seeing that episode? Where is it going? The Mac Minis and then out to devices? Like, real quick, what's that process look like?
Sure. So Overcast has always been server-side crawling for feeds, which is now how almost every podcast app works. Your app on your phone does not directly access your RSS feed. It's syncing back and forth with Overcast servers, and then Overcast servers are crawling the feed, and when updates happen, they pick them up within a few minutes of the episode being published, and then they push out updates to everyone's phone that contain that episode. And then your phones then go and download the episode directly from you. So it's kind of this triangle. When transcripts were added, it really just became part of that process. When a new episode is detected, my servers add it to the transcript queue. And the transcript queue, like all those Mac Minis, are just queue consumers. So they are just constantly checking in with the servers. Hey, what do you got? What do you got? What do you got? And the servers, every time a new episode comes in, they add it to the queue. Most of the time, the queue is empty because the servers are keeping up with it. Occasionally, if there's a really high traffic period, or if I am doing a big backlog of a big podcast, sometimes that queue might, have a bit of a wait. But it's sorted by popularity of shows. So your show, being pretty popular, is going to get transcribed almost immediately after the episode's released. So then I transcribe it. Like, one of those Mac Minis claims it. It transcribes it. It puts the transcript up on Overcast storage. And then it sends an update to all the phones that had that episode saying, hey, we got this. Here's the transcript. And then when you either download or play that episode, it downloads the transcript and shows it.
So if I, as the podcast creator, if we were to upload a different MP3 because something had to be edited out or changed, does that whole chain get triggered again once the RSS feed gets updated? Or how is the transcript, and then that transcript that lives, I think, on Cloudflare, is that then updated? How does that work?
No. So Overcast, the scale of how many podcasts and episodes out there are would be way too much for Overcast to check for updates to the audio files after they've been published, so it doesn't. So if you upload an edited version of the audio file, the transcript will no longer be accurate to it. However, you would be then running into the same logic I use for dynamically inserted ads. So what happens is, before the phone shows a transcript for the episode, it compares the signature of the file that it got from when it downloaded the episode from the publisher, and then the transcript knows the signature that it got that it transcribed. And the phone compares those. This is what I was talking about with my alignment earlier. The phone compares those, and it can figure out, okay, well, it looks like audio was inserted at this timestamp and deleted at this timestamp and changed in this time range here. And so it just basically zeroes out those parts of the transcript that don't match up. It displays as the ellipsis in Overcast when it hits one of those, which I think is actually the same thing Apple Podcast does with their transcripts. And so any part that does not line up with what the server's transcribed will just be an ellipsis, and it will adjust the timing of everything else. If my code is right, it will adjust the timing of everything else to line up with the version that you actually downloaded.
And if a creator attaches a transcript in the RSS feed, Are you doing anything with that?
Not yet. I'm actually in the process of building. So, I ship transcripts with one version of the alignment code that I thought covered all bases, but it turns out it didn't. And the way that the text is rendered in the interface is using SwiftUI, using a giant series of text, basically, of text instances. And there are a couple of issues with that. Number one was the performance is not amazing. That's why right now if you tap the mini player to expand it up on a very long episode, you get a little bit of a delay before it expands upward. That's because it's rendering all those text nodes in SwiftUI, and it's not efficient enough. The other problem is, of course, the very first feature people ask for is the ability to copy and paste text out of the transcript. And as it turns out, doing that when you're rendering a whole bunch of SwiftUI text instances is not good. It's either impossible or it certainly does it in a way that nobody wants. So what I'm in the process of doing now, in addition to fixing those alignment bugs, is one thing I was working on yesterday was converting the rendering of the transcript to a web view. Now web views have a bad rap, I know, but Overcast uses them already, and most people don't even realize it. Like the show notes, for instance, that's a web view. I just make it a good web view.
It is a good web view, I can attest.
Thank you. So I'm using the same logic now. I'm putting transcripts in a web view. That way text selection will be much faster, and the rendering of them and the tracking of them as they scroll also is far faster when using a web view than it is using SwiftUI.
Okay, so I recently did a video about the best podcast apps, and I did put you as the best audio because of this. Oh, thank you. The transcript feature is awesome. Even the little music notes when music is playing behind like an ad or something, very nice touch. No other app does that. For private feeds, which again, I think yours is the only app that will do transcripts for private feeds.
It is.
Which is awesome. So that's transcribing locally on device if that transcript does not already exist. Is that accurate?
No.
Oh, it is not. Okay.
That's also, private feeds, they're still being server-side crawled. So what I'm doing is trying to identify clusters of private feeds where, most private podcasts, they are not, they're private, but they're still serving the same content to a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm basically doing like duplicate detection there of like, if I'm seeing the same audio file being published in different feeds, I can just transcribe it once and serve it to all those people. So it's not doing everything because there is still like a minimum number of duplicates that I will queue for transcription. Like if you're the only person listening to a feed, if you have something served just to you, Overcast is not going to transcribe that. But once it reaches a few people or more, then I will add that to the queue. And then once I transcribe that version, if I see it's being served to somebody else, it's the exact same file, they'll get the transcript too.
So are you ever doing on-device transcribing right now?
Never without user requests.
So if the user says do it,
yes.
Then that's doing it.
Yes.
How do you, because I have a lot of shortcuts that use the built-in transcription action, and what I have found is that action specifically on a Mac can transcribe 3-hour plus audio files, no problem. It seems different on the iPad and the iPhone and its ability to transcribe longer files. Like it just won't. It'll fail usually if the audio file is like 20 or 30 minutes or longer. Is there, like, the way you're doing it, is there any limit to how that on-device model can do it? Like, is the way you're doing it with API somehow different than a shortcuts action that it's doing it?
I don't know how the shortcuts action is doing it, but I'm just using Apple's built-in speech transcription API that they launched with the 26 series OSs. There actually was an API earlier than that, but it was much worse and much more limited. It was dramatically remade and improved in 26. I do have limits, but they are much higher. It's like, I think it's 4 or 6 hours.
Okay.
And even then, that's more of a limit of like the audio fingerprinting code that I use for alignment and stuff like that. It starts making signatures that are just way too big and kind of unwieldy. But there is no inherent limitation that would prevent that, except when you are doing local transcription on an iOS device, you have to you have to contend with the limits the system is going to put on you for total processing time.
Right.
So last year they introduced that API where that like Final Cut can use, where it makes the live activity when you're doing an export.
Yes.
So I'm using that API during my transcriptions on the phone. That allows you to use much more background processing time than anything previous. However, it still isn't enough for a very long podcast on current phone hardware. Over time, that will start to become less important as the phones get faster. But we're not talking about 15% faster. We're talking about like once they're 5 times faster. Then this might be 10 years from now or more. It might be a while, but at that point, you'll be able to do a lot more things before hitting those limits. But right now, those limits get in the way.
That probably explains the difference between what's going on with shortcuts and what's going on with your app.
Probably, yeah. I'm guessing shortcuts is hitting one of those processing time limits.
Marco, what model are you using to do the transcription?
It's Apple's built-in model.
Okay.
So the Speech Transcriber API, it has its own model. It's the same model that Apple uses for all the places on the system that transcribe speech to text. So that's the dictation button on the keyboard. It's Siri, obviously. It's dictation of voice memos. Apple Notes. It's all the same model.
So what's your experience with it? How's it doing?
It has a couple of quirks, but it's overall it's pretty good and it's very fast. What I needed for this to be fast, because for me to have any kind of scale whatsoever, it takes 48 Mac Minis to keep up with with the new podcasts that are being released every day.
Yeah, how did you come up with that number, 48? I mean, what did you just keep buying them until it seemed to find parity?
Much. Yeah, I just kept buying them.
Yeah.
Like I would buy like, because the racks the little enclosures I put them in hold 6 each. And so I just kept buying like 6 and then 6 more and then 6 more. And yeah, basically. I was like scrounging around, like whenever there was a sale, I would piece them together. So there'd be, this is, back in the olden days when Mac Minis were on sale. They would, Black Friday came around and I like, oh, B&H has them for, $4.75 and Amazon has them for $4.82, and then but there's a limit of 2 here and 3 here. So I would piece together different sales and just like, and I learned little tricks like, when Amazon has a limit per customer, it's like a hard limit. You can't just place another order tomorrow, whereas B&H doesn't care at all. So you can place 3 orders in a row at B&H for 2 each if the limit is 2, and you'll get 3 orders the next day. Like, it's great. So
how much can you sell this on eBay for right now? Could you get $1 million for this?
You could pay the college tuition off if you sold them, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you, with the accuracy, this whole system probably wouldn't work or wouldn't be the system you would use if you wanted to use Whisper API or a different, transcription AI. Have you thought about, like, would you get better accuracy elsewhere? Or have you thought about not using Apple's for any reason?
I've looked at things like NVIDIA's Parakeet model, for instance. That's probably the next best competitor for this, because it also runs locally and is also very fast. It's better in some ways, worse in others, and I wouldn't be able to practically ship it in Overcast on the phone. And so if I switch to that, local transcription on the phone would be different than what the servers are doing. Right now, it's the same because it's using the same APIs, and I consider that a good feature. So I'd like to try to stick with Apple's over time if I can. But yeah, Parakeet would be the next one to try. Now, if I was doing like a remote API, like what you're saying, if I was just using the Whisper API, for instance, usually those have limits for audio duration that are too short for most podcasts, or at least podcasts at scale. Not to mention the fact they would cost significantly more. We're talking 10 times or more additional cost compared to what I'm paying now.
And honestly, the Apple one is as bad as it's ever going to be right now, and it's pretty good. And like in June, my guess is it'll get a nice step up with the new software. So you're fine.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm banking on. Is like right now, look, it's really imperfect. There's lots of errors, but what I'm using it for is not a replacement to listening to the audio. I don't think any of the machine transcriptions are good enough for that yet, except possibly the largest Whisper models that are very expensive and slow to run, that would never scale to this kind of usage. But right now, it is not, like, reading the text is not a good replacement for listening to the audio. Eventually, hopefully, it is good enough that it can be. We're not there yet. But what it is good at now is skimming. And so if for instance, your podcast that you're listening to, your tech podcast is talking about baseball, and you want to be able to skim right past that, you can do that really easily. Or suppose they start an ad read for an ad you've heard 5 times in the last hour. You can just skim right to the end of that really easily, to the point where once you get accustomed to navigating a podcast via transcript, I think using the seek controls feels barbaric by comparison, and that's why I'm hoping, over time. I mean, this opens up tons of great feature ideas and interface and navigation ideas that, of course, I'm working on. I think over time, we're not going to be using those seek controls very much at all. I think we're going to start navigating much more via transcripts or automatic topic selection and things like that.
Another example of things that we just have to rethink how we use.
Absolutely.
Yeah. With the RAM and storage constraints today, in retrospect, would you have gotten different models than the base model for your server?
No, only because the reason I chose the base model, Apple's model, I don't think uses the GPU at all. I think it's all CPU based. At least on the M4s, it is. And when I did the math of what's the most CPU performance per dollar that you can get, and the base model blows away any other configuration in that metric. It's not even close. If you want the very first M4 Pro model costs, I think, a little bit more than twice as much, and is nowhere near twice as much the CPU performance. So bang for the buck wise, it was no contest. Now, where I am limited is none of them have more RAM than the 16 gigs. And so if I wanted to, for instance, one way I could architect this is I could have most of the servers do that first pass, and then once they have a transcript, I could send them to a bigger server and say, use a more complex model to maybe clean this up, find and fix errors, do topic detection and stuff like that. And I don't have any computers to do that right now. They're all the same low spec. And that's something I'll look at over time as I investigate those kind of features. Maybe that'll be necessary. Maybe it won't. But the performance per dollar of those base models is just so far ahead of every other option. Nothing else was compelling, not even close.
Yeah, I really feel like you're going to not need to upgrade those computers. I think the local models are going to get good. The hardware is going to get so much faster. In a year or two, you'll be shocked how much of this stuff can get done on the phone.
I think you're right.
How are you remote managing them, though? I mean, that's a lot of computers.
Poorly.
Okay.
So because I am not just a podcast app maker, but because I'm also a podcaster, it was important to me to have a really fun story out of this.
Yeah.
So as I was buying and installing 48 Mac Minis and setting up this ridiculous system and learning how data centers work and then getting my own rack cabinet and learning all that stuff, as all of that was happening, I didn't mention it in public at all, because I wanted to make a really great episode of ATP when I finally told Casey and John live on the air, and of course all of the audience as well. Yeah. They all learned at the same time. When I'm doing something like this, I don't tell Casey and John in advance, because it makes for a better show. It's more fun because they're also my friends, and I want to surprise my friends.
Yes.
It's a better story. I think it makes for a better podcast, and I just like having that to surprise my friends.
When John
I did the same thing with buying the restaurant.
When John surprised you all and Merlin when he went independent, that was also a wonderful surprise.
Exactly. He's like, I quit my job. We're like, what? Yeah, it was great. I love doing those stories. And so as a result of me kind of keeping this quiet for almost a year as I was deploying all these, I didn't ever want to ask on the show, hey, anybody have any suggestions for remote management and fleet management of devices for Apple? Because I knew about stuff like MDM. I had initially looked at some of the products out there, and the pricing was just not going to make sense for what I was doing. When you're looking at $8 or $10 per month per device, that's $500 a month at least.
Yes.
And I'm only paying $1,000 a month for the whole rack cabinet, then the internet and the power and everything to it. So that's a pretty big jump for. Do I really need that? So what I did was manually go through. When I would get my 6-pack of Mac Minis, I would get one or two of those and pile them up in my office. And one night I would put on some podcasts and play it on my phone, and I would just one by one plug in a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, and connect each one by one, go through the setup process one by one. I had a list that I was following. I did it manually. I have seen that stupid liquid glass welcome screen 48 times.
Hello.
Yes, and it says welcome, and it's so slow,
It
and you
is.
have to wait for the animation
Can't skip
because
it.
they really want to show you how nice liquid glass is. And did you know image playgrounds are here?
I did not.
It turns out they are, and that's
48
something that you
times.
learn 48 times. Image playgrounds are here. And so I went through all that, and I did them all manually. And then what I did was I set up tail scale on each one as part of that process, manually. But once it's set up, and once you go disable key expiry on tail scale for all of those, learn that lesson. Once it's all set up, then now I just have like a bash shell script to whenever I have an update to the software they're running, which is just a Mac app, I just basically SCP it to all of those in a row and use SSH to like remotely terminate and relaunch it. LaunchD is managing it on the service for me. So the actual operation of them now is fully automated through just, crappy ways like that, with the sole exception of software updates. Those are not managed. So I haven't yet really had to face that yet. I have them doing automatic updates for security, but nothing else. So I'm going to have to, at some point, deploy something that's going to manage that for me, and maybe that'll be a project for this summer. We'll see.
Have you ever had an issue where you couldn't solve it remotely and you had to go to the data center physically? What was that? And is it like a Severance style experience? Like, do you have a key card? You like go in the elevator and all that? How's that go?
Yeah, not the entire Severance experience.
Sure.
There's a pretty significant part missing, but yeah, I have a key card and I gotta swipe the key card, type it in, and then like all the lights turn on in front of you because it's all motion sensor. Because data centers want to save power wherever possible, and most of the time there's no one in most rooms. The rooms are filled with cages and computers and everything, and so you walk around, the lights light up in front of you, and then eventually the ones behind you start turning off, and you're just kind of alone, hearing a bunch of fan noise, looking around like down these perfectly pristine like white aisles, lots of air conditioning blowing through there, and it's a weirdly lonely but cool experience. Before this, I had never been in a data center. I've always run leased or virtual servers for all my stuff I've ever done. So I've never actually been in a data center. And it was a really cool process to learn. Thank goodness for AI for a lot of that stuff. And the staff there was very helpful, but it's, they're not always, it's like, one guy at a desk in the front, but they're all nerds like us and they want to help as much as possible. But a lot of it, I wanted to figure out on my own. So even just stuff like, all right, they give me a fiber drop. What is that? How do I plug that in, and what do I plug it into? And then how do I configure the thing I'm plugging it into to use whatever the drop is that they're giving me? And there's a bunch of different answers to that, and a bunch of different standards, and different pieces of equipment, different terms that I had to use. And AI was very helpful in navigating me through all of that. But for the most part, most of it's remotely controlled now. To answer your question, I hardly ever need to go there physically. I really only if I'm going to move some servers around or whatever. But what I did, I have like a remote power switch thing that if I need to remotely power cycle a computer, I can do that now, as long as that computer is not the router. I can now do that. If it ever is the router, that'll be an instance where I probably call the data center and have them go do it for me. And there is a service where they will do that for some hourly rate. They'll go do whatever you need to do.
Network DoorDash.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's amazing. All right. Well, I have some Overcast feature requests. Is now a good time?
Absolutely.
As we do on the show. Give you a list of work.
Yeah.
So I dove in, and so I love the now playing screen is great, especially being able to swipe over to the transcript. Show notes, across many podcast apps are not formatted well, but yours are formatted really well. My biggest issue is the queue. And so on the now playing screen,
yes,
you got all the controls I could ever want. I love the swiping over to show notes and transcript. Can I get access to my up next queue from the now playing screen?
So let's talk about queues. This is great. I didn't know you were going to ask about this, but so it turns out. Okay, so when I first made Overcast, I based everything around playlists. Because my playlists, they're smart playlists in old iTunes terms. So they don't have to be, but they are by default. So they are basically, just filters, like smart filters that constantly update. So you can say, I maintain one, like I maintain like a main one that has most of my podcast in it. And then I have one called shower. It's like stuff I like to listen to in the shower. I have one called car, like stuff I like to listen to with the family on car trips. And so I'll have rules that like exclude these shows from the main playlist so I can save them for shower or car, And I thought this is how everyone does podcasts, obviously. And as it turns out, that's not the case. As it turns out, people have lots of different ways they can organize things. Now, one of the very first feature requests, was people wanted a queue. And I thought, well, I've already built this entire system of playlists, and it's what everybody wants in a queue. You can like drag them to reorder manually, and you can have stuff automatically inserted as it comes in. And I thought, well, that's great. So I'll just make a special playlist that's just called queue, but it's just the title of it. And I'll have shortcuts in the interface like add to queue that just create or find a playlist with that title and just insert it into that playlist. And as it turns out, and this is what I've been doing for the last probably 12 of these 14 years, whatever, or 10 of these 12 years. As it turns out, everyone hates that except me. And so and if you look at my like App Store reviews, my star reviews, there's a couple of consistent problems that people report that I haven't solved yet. One of them is storage limits. I know, everybody. I'm trying. The background download system is difficult to work with, especially when people have like 100 podcast subscriptions. So I'm working on that. The other big issue people have is nobody wants the queue the way I do it. Everybody wants the queue to be the way most apps do it, which is the way Apple Podcasts does it, and I think Pocket Casts as well, which is just basically like an up next list maintained right in the app, kind of almost like an in-memory thing, like not even like a persistent thing necessarily. That's what people want. And so I've recently decided I need to do that. Like, I don't know when I'm going to do that, but I have decided I am going to do that. It's a big change. It's going to be a big effort. But that's obviously what everybody wants, and enough is enough, so it's coming.
Okay, well, that is very exciting to me. I will say, please do not look at Apple Podcasts as an example for the up next queue, because I have found of all the apps, and I've told them directly, like, it is not good. One of the main reasons is because they have both a up next area and a continue playing area, and I cannot drag an episode from one to the other, which is just an insane UI paradigm. Like, these are all episodes that I want to listen to soon. Why can't I drag something from the continue playing to the queue? That's wild to me. And they'll also have bad, like, the episode I'm currently playing, if I want to jump to Dithering because it came out this morning and it's a quick listen, if I tap it in my queue, whatever episode was currently playing disappears. And I have to go to that episode or that podcast and click play again. Whereas Pocket Casts, it moves whatever you are currently listening to back down to the top of the queue, which is how and I think a lot of people use up next queues. Like, whatever I'm currently listening to, unless I explicitly dismiss it or say I've listened to it, never let it go. Don't let me go. Whatever the Titanic is, don't do it. So that would be my personal request.
All right. Honestly, that's really helpful, because one of the challenges of developing many apps, but in this case podcast apps, is there's all these little like micro behaviors that when somebody makes a feature request, say, I want an up next queue. Okay. Well, but then you start thinking when you have to go implement it, okay, well, what should happen if this condition or this series of events occurs? What should the behavior be? And what people expect is not always the same, like between different people. And whatever decisions you make on all of those little micro behaviors, you're going to confuse and anger some group of people and please another group of people. And there is no set of decisions you can make that will please everybody.
Sure.
And it's very difficult to try that. Like, one of the biggest problems I have in Overcast is the episode limit feature. The idea here is, keep only the last 3 new episodes in this feed. Okay. What should happen if you're listening to the 4th one?
Right.
What about if you go down the old episode list of that show and you add like numbers 8, 9, and 10, you want to listen to those. Well, then do those immediately get deleted? Do you somehow keep the ones you've added manually, which is what Overcast does, but then people look at the screen and they have 6 episodes downloaded and you said limit 3. This feature's broken. Like, there is no way to implement an episode limit feature that doesn't seem broken or behave counterintuitively at least a big part of the time. But
Right.
there's no amount of those decisions that you can make about how that should work to make that feature actually sensible and consistent and match everyone's expectations. So I would love to just not have that feature. But because I've had it since the beginning and a lot of people use it, I can't get rid of it.
Sure, for sure. Well, I think Pocket Cast up next queue is probably the standard. That's how my mind works. I know it's not for everybody, but I would say just rip theirs. But my last two feature requests, these are strictly about the widget, only because I am one who doesn't use the podcast app icon. I have the widget on my home screen, and that's just how I play the next episode or launch the app. And the Overcast widget, it looks great.
Is it too orange for you?
Well, so
I get that one a lot.
I got two requests. That's one of them. The first one is the actual play button. You have it centered, whereas most other podcast apps like Pocket Cast has it left aligned. Apple Podcast has it left aligned, and it also has the remaining time in whatever podcast you're currently listening to, like next to the play button. So one, I prefer a left aligned play button. That's just me. And two, the color coordination. Pocket Cast used to do this, where when you would play a podcast, the widget would change color to match the show art. Apple Podcast widget still does this, so when you press play, it matches it. And I don't know if this is still possible because Pocket Cast stopped doing it, so now no third-party app matches the show art. But if that is possible, that would be my request. Left-aligned play button, color matching widget.
I just have one question. Steven, do you always run 3 podcast widgets on your phone?
No, I literally just added those to the stack right before I was asking the question.
All right,
Good,
okay.
good.
I feel better now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot even for me. You'll notice right now there's nowhere in Overcast that uses the artwork coloring in the UI.
Sure.
One of the things I had my Mac Minis doing last summer was calculating the dominant color for each podcast. Because I was testing out different parts of the UI that could use that, and you kind of need to know that before the artwork is downloaded to the phone. So I needed something that ran server side to detect that. So I was trying all that, but I have just no matter what code I've used a lot of different algorithms. Even Apple actually published a sample code that did exactly this years ago. I tried theirs. I tried a couple of different ideas. I have never found one that I thought looked good in places I wanted to use it. And I'm certainly open to continuing to try that. I just like when you see how the different apps use them. For instance, like Apple Podcasts, its now playing screen basically is a dark theme. And it uses like a dark version of the episode art colors behind everything. And the tint color of the controls is just white. All the Apple Podcast controls are just white. And the reason why is if you are trying to layer a UI on top of a translucent content area with unpredictable content behind it, it's really hard to pick colors and contrast and layouts and control designs that work with that in all cases. And I have not yet found anything in Overcast that I thought was better when I put the episode artwork colors behind it. Sometimes I can get it to look great like in one test, but then I try it like on a bunch of other shows, and there's always enough cases where it looks bad or doesn't provide enough contrast or just looks messy or dirty. I've just never found a version of that I like. That being said, in the case of the widget, there's no technical reason why I couldn't do that. There's just, I think, a taste reason why. I just don't like it. That being said, I do know that a lot of people would prefer it not to be bright orange, so that's also on my to-do list, is give more widget color options. And as for the left aligning of the play button, that was mostly just pride. When I obviously I saw when Apple did their widget, I obviously started with that as inspiration. Let's say I didn't copy it; it was inspiring. But I always try, whenever I am adding a feature or a UI situation that other apps have already added, I try not to just directly copy them, and that is often to a fault. Like in some cases, I'm just being contrarian. Like Apple's one-button mice. At some point, it's like, okay, the solution here is to just copy what everyone else is doing because that's what everybody expects, and it turns out it might even be a better design. But I'm just so stubborn that sometimes it takes me a long time to get there. So in that particular case, I think you are probably right that left aligning it is probably the move. In my defense, I designed that before iOS 26, where everything became left aligned. But yes, I probably should update it to be left aligned. And putting the remaining time in there, yeah, there's no reason why I can't do that.
Well,
yeah.
I have a request for the audience. If you haven't checked out Overcast lately, you should.
Yes.
Marco has not been sitting on his hands over there. Not only did you build out your 48 Mac Mini server to give us all transcripts, which is a remarkable feat. I just want to say, I mean, I don't know anybody else that would have. I'm sure somebody maybe had the idea, but nobody would execute it the way you did. And that is really impressive. But the app itself is just, you've really done a lot of work on this app the last several years. And if you're listening, you haven't checked out Overcast lately, you should. And Marco's one of us. So, support one of us.
Thank you very much.
It is an incredible app. And one last question about your app. Because we are now in a video killed the radio star world, it seems like, video is now going everywhere. How do you think about your app with the increasing video pressures? I know me as a creator, like, it is complicated, and it's complicated for listeners. Like, I have paid subscribers in Apple Podcasts message me at least once a day, hey, where's my video? I just supported your show. And I have to tell them Apple Podcast subscriptions doesn't give me a way to deliver video to paying subscribers. So thanks for supporting the show, but you don't get video. And it's complicated. So how are you thinking? How are you feeling about the current landscape with video and all that?
It's complicated. I got to say, I don't love it, but I also recognize so just like, bigger picture than smaller pictures. Bigger picture, it is not useful to try to police how people use the term podcast. It just isn't. It doesn't matter. The same way like we used to have arguments over what's a blog, and it doesn't matter what anybody says. People are going to use it how they're going to use it, and podcast does not anymore. It no longer means an audio show delivered via RSS feed. Podcast is now just a format, and like not to say a file format, but it's like a discussion format. So people who it wouldn't surprise me to see people who have an in-person event in an auditorium with a stage. If they have 4 chairs up there and people are going to sit there and talk to each other casually, they're going to call that a podcast. Because podcast just means a mostly unscripted conversation, kind of more casual, maybe a little long, compared to the kind of videos that you normally make. You're writing scripts and doing probably writing every word you say, or at least most of them, by doing research and doing stuff ahead of time, and you're making a polished, edited, highly produced final copy of something. That's not a podcast. That's like a video. Podcast no longer means audio. Podcast just means conversation. And so I have to recognize that's the reality of the world. That's never going to change, or rather, it's never going to go back. And that's just what the word means now. So to some degree, it presents pretty big problems for Overcast, because not only is Overcast not a video app, and I don't really intend for it to become one, but what people actually mean when they say video podcast, usually that they mean YouTube. And YouTube has no way for apps like Overcast to legally access its content and play it. Now, there is this new world developing. We're still in the early days of it. Apple Podcasts kind of work with some hosts to create this new HLS-based video standard. The downside is that unless the publishers explicitly add it to their feeds, which not many are doing, it's a totally private, proprietary system that is not being exposed in public RSS feeds for apps like Overcast to use. So that means that the way most video podcasts are being published and made available today is not available to players like Overcast. So even if I wanted to build video support, it would support very few shows. And I think over time that number will go up, but I don't see it ever being most shows. So if I say I offer video, I think I'm only going to set people up for disappointment when inevitably they try to play the video in Overcast and, it only works for 2 of my 5 shows that I would expect it to work on, say. That's just a bad experience, and I don't think that's a great product decision to make to go into that when it's just going to disappoint everybody. So my plan for video in Overcast so far is not to support it, to continue to not support video, to just be the best audio player I can be. And that gives me a lot of flexibility. Obviously, things like transcripts and lining them up and everything, all of that becomes either impossible or much more complex once you add video. You might have problems, like for instance, video doesn't really work great with dynamic ad insertion without doing some proprietary stuff right now, and that's part of the reason they don't want to make it available to players like us, because it would be super easy to just skip the ads or not load them or not send the data they want because we're not creepy. So there's all sorts of reasons why I think that world is going to remain mostly separate on a technical side. The downside is, it obviously does create problems for, perception and expectations. But I think, again, I'm just going to focus on being the best audio app I can for now, and over time I'll reevaluate. If the video landscape becomes, more broadly accessible to public apps like Overcast, maybe I'll make a different decision in the future. But right now, I'm happy to focus on audio.
Well, and for me, I don't script my videos or podcasts. So technically every video I make is a podcast and every podcast is a video. So the only difference is microphone in the shot or microphone out of the shot.
Yeah, right.
That's the
it's a prop to indicate podcast video.
That's it. But I will say two things. One, when Apple introduced video, there is an open standard that, like you said, some hosts are supporting. Transistor.fm supports it. Alternate enclosure, which lets you actually link to a video file as an alternate enclosure to an MP3. And third-party podcast apps could have supported that. Fountain is a podcast app where you can actually go and switch between video and audio from an RSS feed. Both files are in the RSS feed. And it's unfortunate that Apple didn't go the alternate enclosure route, but instead they went through the dynamic ad insertion purpose route. And that I think a lot of hosts would have suddenly supported the alternate enclosure if Apple had gone that way, but they didn't. The second thing is, I'm actually optimistic for apps like Overcast, because I think those who enjoy listening to podcasts, listening specifically, which is still me, I still listen to podcasts primarily, like 99% of the time. I think having the best audio experience can now be a differentiator for Overcast. And the Apple Podcast experience for shows who have added video, like my other show, it's actually gotten worse. No more chapters with video. The transcript doesn't follow along with the video. And these are things Apple might fix. But because it's now become a worse audio experience, it is very hard, like you said, to do great both ways, great video and great audio. And so I think for those who are diehard podcast fans, and it might not be the majority of podcast consumers, but I think it's going to be a large part and a passionate part of the podcast community, they're going to love apps like Overcast because it's the best audio listening experience.
That's what I'm hoping, and I think it will work out that way for so many practical reasons, production reasons, technical reasons, and business reasons. The reason why the transcript won't line up is because they're almost certainly going to use dynamic ad insertion on the audio version, but then that, again, we know that messes up transcripts, and it's going to work differently in video because of the way they implemented things and everything. So that's going to be complex there. And there's all sorts of, even just as you're producing the content, when you are producing an audio podcast, like, my podcasts that I make are all audio only. We don't do video. And maybe in the future that'll change. But, we know people who do both. And typically the way, I will make so many little edits in audio that I would never make in video because it would make a weird jump cut or you would notice it in a weird way. And my style of editing for audio is, if I think you're going to notice an edit, I won't make it. I want all my edits to be totally seamless in the audio, so it sounds like the conversation actually happened this way. Not that somebody jumped in too soon and interrupted somebody, or not that somebody had to stop in the middle to cough or whatever. Those I edit. I make all these little tiny micro edits as I go along. If it's video, you really can't do that to that same degree. And you might make different decisions. So, for instance, you might have a different choice of headphones or microphones, or you might skip them entirely because they don't look good on video, but they sound worse then, or the resulting product sounds worse. So there's if you lean too hard into video, I think both in the software and in the content part, it does actually sacrifice some of the quality of the audio product. And I'm very happy to stay in the audio world for almost everything I do. I think that's still how I prefer to listen to podcasts, is in audio, the vast majority of the time. And I also like watching YouTube videos. And to me, those formats have not merged. Those are two different things that I watch in different contexts, and I'm looking for different things out of them.
All right. Moving on. We've got a new president coming in, or a new CEO coming into Apple, John Ternus. What are, do you think, some leading indicators when he starts that's going to show he's on the right track?
It's hard to set a timeline expectation because the company is so big that, if John Ternus wants to change certain things that I'm looking for, we're not going to see it anytime soon. We might start seeing like small signs of those kinds of changes, over the next 5 years or something.
Yeah.
Or, for like, practical or PR or power reasons, some things might require, other executives to also retire a few years from now before they can change and things like that. But kind of broad strokes, what I'm looking for is, I think Apple has gone a little bit astray in a few areas that not only are like, little pet peeves of mine, but actually make their products worse. One of them is the relentless push into services has given them strong incentives to bother the user with upsells and ads and nags in a lot of these system apps and kind of the experiences in using their products that I think make the products worse. One of those they're just launching soon or now, which is the ads in Apple Maps. Great example of that. They've recently increased the ad load in the App Store app for when you search for search ads, because they make a bunch of money from those, and now they can make even more. And they've set up their incentives such that for them to continue to increase profits, they now have strong financial incentives to continue to ratchet up annoyances and upsells and ad load in various parts of their system. Meanwhile, their brand is premium. They are selling these products at premium prices to customers who want that, who want premium experiences, and that's fundamentally in conflict with loading up the experience with more and more ads. It also goes against many of their privacy goals, and certainly it can get them into trouble with regulators around the world as they apply different rules to themselves as they would apply to others, and exercise privileges that they have that others don't have. So what I would like to see from a Ternus era in that area is finding ways to grow revenue that don't sacrifice the quality or user experience of the products and don't put them in direct conflict with each other. That would be great. And the more ads I see in the system and in the system apps, that's telling me they're going in the wrong direction on that. So maybe a course correction on that would be nice. And then the other big area I think would be continuing to reduce the reliance on China and on TSMC, both of which I think are tenuous for various reasons and just not a great place to be so reliant. Obviously, that's not a small task, but that's going to be, hopefully the Ternus era, we can start to see some diversification. They have some now, but like they need a lot more. So start to see some of those shifts. And then finally, I would love to see Apple take their relationship with developers a lot more seriously than they do. The Apple under the outgoing leadership and under Steve Jobs as well, Apple's not good at negotiating. Apple's not good at power dynamics where they don't have all of the power. And that's not really negotiation. Apple's really good at dictating terms. That's true across everything. Developers, their component suppliers, their manufacturing partners, governments. They're really good at dictating terms. But negotiation is needed when you don't have all of the power in the relationship. And in many of those areas, I think they really need to develop those skills because they have had pretty poor skills in that area so far. But with developers, there's not as strong of a need to force them to be a little more humble and a little more warm in that relationship because they still have so much power over us. But that does harm the products. We mentioned earlier, the Vision Pro. Vision Pro has very little developer support. It also has very small install base of customers. So why would anybody make software for it? If developers loved Apple more and were more excited about Apple's platforms, we would make software for platforms even if there wasn't as much of a financial incentive to do so, just because we use them ourselves, or we love them and we see maybe a bright future, or just we want it to exist. Back in the old days of the Mac, before Apple was today's Apple, the Mac was not a big software platform by market share, but it had a lot of great software. Why? Because people who made great software loved the Mac and used it themselves and wanted to support it and wanted these apps to exist themselves. And where Apple has gotten today is very different. Today, their incentives are all just to maximize their own money in the short term, but that sacrifices long-term developer sentiment in a bunch of ways that I think are unnecessary. If Apple would loosen its iron grip a little tiny bit, I think it would cost them very little revenue, percentage-wise, and would dramatically improve the relationship with developers, which would dramatically increase the amount of good quality software that's made for their platforms, and would reduce a lot of the regulatory pressure they face around the world that is threatening much bigger harm and much more limitations to their hardware products. So ultimately, I think the Tim Cook era was very short-sighted in how it treated developers, and I would like to see the John Turnus era start to realize the longer-term picture and the bigger picture of, like, if we treat developers better, if we value them more, and not just, in 2 weeks they're going to tell us how much they're going to value us. They're just telling us. We want them to show us.
Yeah.
And once they show us how much they value us, if that increases, that will be a sign that the Turnus era is going in the right direction.
To quote Eliza Doolittle, "Don't give me words, show me." I would add one more. I think they need a shakeup in software. I think Apple software itself, the UI thing the last year is kind of a fiasco, but I think just in general, the software needs a new focus.
I am mostly on board with that. I do think, I don't know, who along the line would need to change or what goal would need to change along the line.
Yeah, I'm not calling for people to get fired. I just think they need to rethink
I do
it.
think I think the Craig Federighi era is closer to the end than most people think it is.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. That's just kind of a hunch I have. I don't have any inside info on that, but just kind of a hunch. And between the Alan Dye shakeup to Stephen LeMay, if last winter, and now the CEO shakeup, I think we're going to see a lot of change in that area. But again, this is going to take time to really see results from.
Yeah.
So I hope to see results in that area. The software, it's not as bad as it has been at certain low points in the past, but the design choices are pretty spotty. I definitely want to see the 27 OS. Obviously, we definitely need a lot of help on the Mac, and even on iOS. I think anywhere that you see a blurred bar with text flowing under it, that's a design failure. Whenever you have blurry text, something is wrong. And I would love to see them reconsider parts of the Liquid Glass design language that require that to be the trade-off, because that's just bad design. Text should always be clear.
My litmus test will be when John Turnus is CEO. This will know that they're looking more for a premium user experience if they take the badge off the settings app for Apple Care. If that goes away,
services revenue,
good sign. That will be the good sign that we're in the right direction there.
Right, but again, like they've set it up that they've created a strong financial incentive to push those add-ons, push the services, push the upsells to everyone possible. That's why you get push notifications now for everything, every possible upsell. You get Apple opting themselves in to certain things that other people have to ask permission for. And you get things like that big red badge to tell you to finish setting up your Mac, you need to give us more money.
So, Marco, we got a little long, but I just wanted to ask, any new apps or services that are bringing you joy and delight these days people may want to check out?
This is going to be the boring answer, but for me, it's Claude Code.
Yeah.
It's really, it's dramatically improving my life in ways that I did not think were possible. That in ways that I'm also just not seeing any other apps besides that really stand out to that degree. I mean, there's lots of great stuff being made, but that's the big one. And it's also allowing me, like, one of my favorite new apps that I'm using constantly is what is now currently called Reminder, my stupid task management app, because I was able to make exactly what I wanted. And I made it largely with the help of Claude Code at first. And so that, to me, like, I think we're already in an era where it's so easy to make custom software that's exactly what you want it to be, even if you're the only user of it. So I think a lot of the benefit and joy that people are going to get out of computers over the next few years is just stuff they made themselves to scratch exactly their itch.
I can absolutely attest. I'm teaching a course on artificial intelligence now, largely focused on Claude Cowork, which is more user-friendly for non-developers. And we have a meetup every Monday. We call it the Builders Club. And senior citizens are writing apps to track the political candidates in Florida. And like just every person that gets on camera, none of these people have a lick of knowledge about programming anything, are suddenly creating custom solutions to their compute problems, things that we've struggled with for years. I think the way we use computers is about to significantly change. And this really shows the way. I mean, I agree.
Yeah, when you look at like in the past, people were able to harness the power of computers either if they were a programmer, or there were tools that caught on that gave people some version of that. Like the spreadsheet is a great example. The spreadsheet brought some power of the computer to a lot of people, and they were able to learn that more easily than programming, and they were able to get a lot of work done and harness some of that immense power that computers have. But they still needed a little bit of knowledge, and it was still kind of limited to what spreadsheets could be wedged into doing. I think now the AI coding era is almost in that same vein. It's almost like the spreadsheet of like, we're now giving people another way to harness the amazing power of their computer without them having to be programmers.
Yeah.
And that's very empowering. Think about all the immense value and independence that was enabled by things like spreadsheets and databases. To have that now for lots of custom software, that's where we are now, and this is the worst it's ever going to be. So that's going to get better over time too. I think the area of like custom bespoke apps made for just you or just your business is going to end up being very similar to custom made spreadsheets that you made for just you or your business.
Yeah.
It's going to empower all sorts of things for all sorts of people.
And we're hurtling toward the Star Trek moment where you just yell out something and you don't think about apps. The computer figures this stuff out and gives you the answer. And
And computers are so much more forgiving now. Like, with AI, it's very forgiving of input. So you can, whether you're doing it by voice or text or image, you can just kind of just slur your answers. You can repeat yourself. You can stutter. You can not know the terms for something. Like I had to replace a charger for an e-bike at the beach, but I wasn't at the beach. I was like, I have an orange e-bike from a company that went out of business a few years ago after they pivoted to a motorcycle and then died. I need a new charger for it. What is it? And it got it. First try, it's like the company was Sondor's. Here's what happened, and here's the charger you need. Search for this thing on Amazon or use this brand name. I was like, that's amazing. Like, I gave it the worst information possible, and it figured it out perfectly and gave me the answer I needed.
I don't even fix typos anymore. Like if I'm typing to Claude or whatever and there's a bunch of typos, I'm like, whatever, it's going to figure it out.
Yeah, like that's one of the best things about AI is it is so much better at dealing with fuzzy, imprecise input than any other technique we've ever come up with.
Yeah.
My last question for you, as the creator of Instapaper, what are you using right now as your read it later service, saving links type service or app?
You're going to hate this answer. I'm not using one. I mostly don't read stuff on the web anymore.
Well, but like just saving links, whether it's like like a video or a podcast episode, are you saving stuff anywhere?
I mean, if it's a podcast, I'm saving it in Overcast.
Sure.
If it's a video, I'm saving it to my YouTube Watch Later playlist.
Sure.
And I sometimes even watch the things on that playlist.
What about when you're saving links for ATP, like some you want to talk about on the show?
I keep the tab open
for the Google Doc or whatever.
Yeah, or I'll put it in the doc if I want to share it with Casey and John, or if I want to just surprise them with it, I'll just keep the tab open, or I might put it in an Apple Note.
Okay.
It's terrible.
You should vibe code an app for that. Saving stuff.
Well, everybody already has. That's the thing.
Well, yeah, that's true.
That's the kind of thing people are just doing themselves now.
Oh, yeah. Like, this is like part of why I might never release my reminder app, because why? Who else is going to use it? I'm making an app that's perfect for me. Is anyone else ever going to want it? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they'll want to vibe code their own.
Yeah, I mean, in my little AI community, 2 guys in there are making their own recipe trackers, and they're sharing notes about it. And one of them said, "Why would anybody make a recipe app now?"
Right.
Why would you? When it knows you personally, it knows your kids' dietary preferences, you can vibe code it up in an afternoon why would anybody make and sell one? It's just a weird time.
Yeah,
Either way,
it's going to radically reshape so many markets. It's a big deal.
Agree. Marco, so great to have you back on the show. I'm in it, gang. Go check out Overcast. It's the best. If you hopefully you're listening to this show on it. If not, maybe listen to the next episode on it. Also, ATP, we've been mentioned, but we never really called it out. Accidental Tech Podcast, one of the premier Apple-related tech shows. Steven's wearing his shirt today.
Nice.
And then, of course, you can always go have Marco make you a burger if you're in Fire Island.
I don't make the burgers. Thanks.
Yeah. And we're going to go talk to Marco about 3D printing real quick and more power users. You could sign up at the link below to become a member. Thank you to our sponsors, NetSuite, Mercury Weather, and 1Password. And we'll see you next week.